And I want to move on to the second part of the chapter, and it's about the fight and victory over the Amalekites. All right, here we are again in the Negev up here. These Amalekites kind of were originated from up in here, and they wandered. Remember, they were nomadic. They were nomads, and so they were wandering around here, and they came across the Israelites down here. And either they heard about them, that they had arrived, because it's kind of hard to just to hide a million people and all the dust and everything else. And then there's Kadesh up here, which we mentioned about where Joshua, his name was changed from Hoshea to Joshua. And then we've still got our campground down here. So these Amalekites have found the Israelis right down in here. And this is where, right at their campsite. So that's where they're fighting now. Okay. All right. So what do we know about the Amalekites? Well, we know there's one word in it, Amalek. We know that you become a kite of something. If you're an Amalek, and you're a whole bunch of Amaleks, then you become a kite. So it's Amalekite. Just like my last name is McKay, and it's spelled M-C-K-A-Y, and the M-C just means son of. So I'm a son of a K. All right, and you can get. I have an Irish background, but if you're Scottish, it's M-A-C. So it's son of K. And you get in the British Isles, I'm not, with Asian names, it's probably a similar pattern to it. But that's how in the British Isles, where my ancestors came from, you were a son of this, they identified you by your trade. So the Amalekites were identified with this guy called Amalek. Okay, and Amalek, our little buddy Amalek, was the grandson of Esau. Esau of Jacob and Esau. Okay, so he was the grandson. Okay, and Esau was from the tribe of the Edomites. And so you got mites now. Instead of kites, you got mites. All right. So you got the tribe of Edom, and if you're in that tribe, you're an Edomite. Okay. So that's how it works. All right. And so they were nomadic people in the Negev, and they just happened to come across the children of Israel. All right, but they were hostile to Israel. There was something that they didn't like about Israel, and it says in the scripture here, in the last verse there, it says, because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. So there was something embedded, something inside these Amalekites that they couldn't stand the children of Israel. And actually, if they're against the children of Israel, they're against God. So the scripture doesn't say, and I think if you did a study on the Amalekites, then you might find out that they were very pagan. They worshipped other gods. They were completely wanted to annihilate. They wanted to make sure that the Israelis didn't exist, except that it worked the other way around. God annihilated them in the end. They might have been, if you think it from their perspective, they might have not appreciated somebody in their territory. When you've got all these people, the Israelites having had all their cattle and their goats and everything else, they needed pasture land too. They needed some place for their livestock to eat. So the Amalekites, if this is their territory, they probably didn't appreciate them being there, and so they were going to go, we're going to get rid of these guys because they're a threat to our very lives. Okay, that may be one of the things. And I'm thinking, I'm just maybe, okay. I have nothing to support this, but God just performed a miracle, and He made this rock have all kinds of water coming out of it. Like it must have been a lake. It must have been a huge water that came in that area, and if the Amalekites came across it, they would see water. Well, that's worth fighting for in the middle of the desert. You want water. So that's worth getting rid of these guys so we can have that pool of water for our livestock. So that might have been playing into this as well. I'm just kind of theorizing, but when you think of cultural dynamics and you think of it, it's a possibility, okay? So they were, they initiated the hostilities. They actually started the war, okay? That's what it means, initiating hostilities. When you went in many, I think in most in the Middle East cultures, if you had a disagreement with someone, and even in World War II, there were negotiations that went on before we actually went to war. Okay, the diplomats would go and they would say, listen, if you don't meet our terms, if you don't let us do this or whatever, we're going to come in and we're going to start a war with you. And so the Amalekites would probably have negotiated beforehand, but Moses was told by God, no, don't negotiate with these guys. You're going to fight them, okay? And I'll be with you. So that's kind of where the fight begins. All right, that's how the war begins, and it was a nasty one. So you think that the Amalekites were not the greatest people, but in God's sovereignty, He saw down the road generation after generation, and He saw that the Amalekites were nasty, nasty people, and they would be a threat to the Israelites for a long, long time. And Joshua would be the one to start the war with them, and it would end up we read in the book of Esther with Haman. He was an Amalekite. So that's quite a few generations how it ended up. Okay.
The King Saul failed to.
King Saul,
Amalekites,
yeah, he failed to do it.
Yeah.
And then it was Samuel that knocked off a few Amalekites, right? And but then Haman was an Amalekite, and he wanted to wipe out the Jews. So it goes on and on. So God knew all this. Okay, we talked about Moses a little bit, but Moses got this rod. He took it with him. We've got Joshua. He's being groomed he's being trained to be the new military leader. It's kind of interesting how the scripture says that all of a sudden this guy Joshua appears in scripture. And this is the first time we see him. But he, as you know, the history of Israel, he becomes a really great soldier and a military leader. He's a great strategist. And anyway, this is where it starts. So at this point, the children of Israel, were not fighting people. They were not trained in military. They were a bunch of sheep herders and a bunch of slaves at this point. And so they didn't know how to fight. But they had God. And God told them to fight, and He said He'd be with them. So they did. Okay, so we get introduced there. And they're to go up onto the rock, close to the battleground, and they're supposed to assist Moses to hold his rod up for the battle. Now, was this a magic wand that was in the rod, or what was the point of this rod that had to be held up over the battlefield in a symbolic way? What was God doing? What do you think He was doing with this? What was the symbolism? What was the reason behind it? Was it, that's a magic rod, that helps people fight,
And of God?
Yeah, it was, if you're a soldier down there and you're fighting away, and you look up and you see Moses with his rod out there, what would it do to your mind? Because you knew something about that rod. That rod it turned water into blood, it just gave you water, it just, it did a number of things, right?
Like a symbol of God.
It was a symbol of God, yeah.
So
Yeah.
when people see the rod is up there, they know the God is with them.
Right.
So
So
they
it
have
would-
courage.
Yeah, they would know that was it. So then you had Aaron and Hur holding him up, so because obviously he would get physically tired. So that's it. But it was also saying something about Moses, wasn't it? That if they saw Moses holding this rod, and God's working through them, then Moses is the man, right? He's the guy that God is chosen to lead. So that was another reinforcement, and that was a big issue the whole time, right? That's why they started complaining and quarreling. They didn't believe Moses was a leader anymore. But with this rod in his hands, and God working through it, and they were winning the battle, and when it was up, they're going, oh yeah, Moses the man. Yeah, he's the guy. God's got him as the leader. All right, and what I've just noted here, it was with the outstretched arms, that they needed to acknowledge that God was there for their victory. Okay, that was the only one. and they wouldn't be able to rely on their own strength. They had to rely on God's strength, because when they went down, they lost. And obviously, you couldn't do it on your own, so it must have been God that was doing it. So that was it. It confirmed the position between Moses and God. And it confirmed that Moses had a huge influence on the well-being of the nation. If Moses wasn't there, they would be eliminated. Okay, so that was his leadership. In spite of what they thought about him, he was the leader. So then they win the battle. Okay, so the Amalekites are defeated, and at the end of the chapter here, we read that God he is planning on annihilating the Amalekites because of their resistance against him. And so once we get into First and Second Samuel and all that in about 20 years, we will discover that that the Amalekites actually do get eliminated. All right. Verse 15, we read that the Lord is my banner. Okay, we talked about a banner and a standard in the ESL words. So here we have this God being, the Lord is my banner. And so it's in the Hebrew, or in the English, it's Yahweh Nissi, Nissi. Okay, I just want to do a quick comparison of how the people responded and how Moses responded. Moses was a real man of prayer. He, and we can follow his example, and I suppose that's part of the application, is look at how instead of Moses joining the crowd about grumbling against God, he went to God and he prayed. He poured his heart out. But he never looked at the people for the support. He always looked to God. All right. And here are some quick references. If there's the page number there for you. This is where at the waters of Marah and Elam. Okay. Remember I took the map down. Where Marah, where he threw the tree into the water. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became fit to drink. Okay, so here's Moses praying, and God came through for him. Exodus 30, the golden calf. You remember, this is jumping ahead into Exodus 32, but you remember that they made a golden calf. And when Moses came down with the Ten Commandments, he couldn't believe his eyes that they had, and this was where Aaron really messed up. Aaron led these people into making this golden calf. So that's why I say that Aaron probably wouldn't get the subcontract on the rod, right? But look at how the type of prayer that Moses does. This is a prayer of what they call supplication. It's when you take a need. We have a need on behalf of someone else. So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They had made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." He is standing in the gap between the people who God would go in a nanosecond if he didn't love them so much, and saying, "Look, they have sinned. I know they've sinned. And you can see that they've sinned. Please forgive them. And if you're not going to forgive them, wipe me out too, because I don't want to be part of this." All right. So that's how he approached God. Was a sin on behalf of the people, or a prayer on behalf of the people. In Numbers, it goes on about just the situation there, fire from the Lord. The people, guess what they did? So therefore they grumbled. They did that again, and so God got really ticked off with them, and he sent a fire into the camp, and the way the scripture goes, and they got really scared, and there was some of the things, the outskirt of the camp got burnt, and so because they were complaining to God about all their hardships, it says that in the first verse there. And then when the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So God really looked to Moses as the one he's going to work through. He didn't want the fire, but he had to show them his power But look at the power, the relationship that Moses had with God. It was awesome. And you remember the word awesome, okay? All right, now here's the story about, I don't know if you remember this, about Miriam and Aaron. They put some opposition up against Moses, his leadership. Here it is, his own wife and Aaron, his right-hand man. And they started going, Moses, what are you doing? What are you doing? And God came down, and he actually, with the way the story goes, he brought them out of their tent, and he sort of lined them up and said, you, and you, stand here and hear what I have to say to you. And when he removed himself from their presence, because he talked in an audible voice to them, Miriam became a leper. She had a disease all over her flesh, which turned her flesh like it was rotting. I don't know if you've ever seen a leper. And so here Moses, in his prayer, so Moses cried out to the Lord, please God, heal her. And he did. Okay. And here's another instance of God wanting to annihilate Israel because of their rebellion and everything. This story goes on and on and on. It's unbelievable over the years. Okay. So Moses said to the Lord, he was reasoning with the Lord, that the Egyptians, when they find, if you're going to wipe out the nation of Israel, Egypt's going to find out about this, and they're going to say, oh, he brought these people out from among them, and he got rid of them because he couldn't deal with them. And so Moses stands in the gap for the people. Man, if it wasn't for Moses, these people would have been dead, right? So, okay, that's the end of my slides, but that pretty well is the story, the two-part story of the chapter 7 of Exodus 17. So we've got the water and we've got the fight. Okay, so what impresses you about that is up to you to think about it. But I think the key here is to remember that God is always there. He's always there, and it's our response to Him that we respond to Him like and come to Him as He is. He is sovereign God. He is God of the universe. He's all powerful. That's the way we approach Him. And if you forget that part, then your life will always be wandering from God. Always, you're in a crisis and you don't know why. You always kind of figure out where your life is going because we just don't look for God where He is. And we have the Scriptures. We have the Bible to read. You have to have your nose in this book daily in order to stay on track and to ask God to show you what's next for today. You know, that's how detailed it is, this relationship with God. You have to. He's your most intimate friend. You cannot go weeks and weeks without being in communion with Him. You just can't. It won't work. And that's what happens. You start wandering out there in the desert. You get thirsty and you don't know why. You know, or you don't know where the source of the water is going to come from. You just wandered. And that's why these people wandered for 40 years until they learned. Yeah, actually, they didn't learn. They didn't learn. All of them died off before the next generation saw. Yeah, all Joshua and Caleb went through. So that's 40 years wandering around, going around and around this mountain out to Mount Sinai, just round and around circles. You know, God will do it. And don't forget, you're dealing with this God of the universe. He lives in eternity. He's got no time on His hands. You do. You got 65, 70, maybe 80 years, and He can just sit back and say, I'm going to show you who's God. Just like He did to Pharaoh. I'll show you who's God. So He can take that attitude too, but He wants us. The real plan is He wants us to come to submit our lives to Him, say, yes, I need you every day, every hour. That's the place He wants us to be. Okay? In Himself. Not in the desert. He wants us to be in Himself. Okay, I hope you learned something.